Okay, so hi, I'm Tiia. I'm from the University of Strathclyde, and I'm presenting my master's thesis today, which is called the Cloud Cooperative. Next slide, please. So I spent my first semester writing a research document on the concept of surveillance capitalism, which is a term coined by Shoshana Zuboff to describe a new type of market economy. So essentially, surveillance capitalism is the extraction of human experience for the profit of others. And the others here can refer to any institution that benefits from monitoring public behavior, such as tech companies, advertisers, election campaigns, and governments. So by accepting terms and conditions on the internet, we're giving companies the right to know our location, friends, search history, and viewing preferences. This information is then sold to advertisers who use it to modify our behavior and to make us buy more stuff, basically. This also works in politics, where social media platforms can easily become political echo chambers and eventually influence who we even vote for. So at the end of this research, I proposed a sort of data revolution where users would take back control of their own private data. And in this system, companies would be held accountable for breaches in privacy, and the infrastructure of the internet would become decentralized. Can I get the next slide, please? So the data brokerage industry operates through a system called the cloud, which can be defined as a global network of servers for the storage and management of data. The cloud is something that we use every day and entrust our most sensitive data to, but it's something that the general public has no real idea of how it properly works. So even though the internet is made to seem spaceless, it does exist on a very physical infrastructure. It's made up of underwater fiber optic cables, internet service providers, and massive energy-intensive data centers. Most of this infrastructure is owned by giant tech corporations like Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. So this centralization has led to violations of our online rights and asymmetries in knowledge and power. In order to combat the current monopoly on data, this project proposes the decentralization of data infrastructure and the creation of a new, more ethical version of the cloud, one that prioritizes users over corporations. Could I get the next slide? So in a decentralized system, the middlemen of the internet would be made obsolete, with devices connecting to each other in a peer-to-peer network, sharing the burden of web hosting. The decentralized internet would be secure and anonymous, and because it's shared across thousands of devices, it can't be shut down by governments. However, this ideal system is still a far ways off from becoming a reality, and instead, my project proposes a more phased approach with centralized data storage combined with a peer-to-peer network. The centralized elements will be hosted in city-specific data grounds, which will store large amounts of data, compute data overflow, and connect the city to the rest of the world via broadband and satellites. Next slide. So users can access this new internet by becoming members of something called the Cloud Cooperative, which will provide them with access to anonymous browsing, free cloud storage, and the possibility of becoming one of these peer-to-peer network hosts. So hosting means that you allow other citizens to connect to the internet via the free storage space in your devices, a service for which these hosts are paid for in the cryptocurrency of their choice. Corporations, on the other hand, must pay for server space at the data grounds. So in exchange for intensive data storage, as well as access to user data, companies must agree to something called the Transparency Clause. And this clause states that users must consent to their data being harvested, they must be paid for the transaction, and their data must be processed only within that specific data grounds and never allowed to leave the country. Next slide. So the architectural typology I'm focusing on with this project is that of the data center as the largest and most obvious physical space of the internet. The current trends in data center design call for massive warehouses that are purposefully opaque and inaccessible, and even their design guidelines call for the use of screening and camouflage to try and disguise their true size. So on this slide, you can see 3 examples of data centers, with the first 2 located in London, and the third one is the current largest data center in the world, the Switch Center in Nevada. The map here shows the city of Reno next to the new Reno Tahoe industrial zone, which includes the 10 Switch buildings, which is just as big as the city itself. So there are 2 main problems with this typology that I wanted to address. First, the fact that these massive under-designed buildings are moving closer and closer to cities. With things like driverless cars and sensors becoming more and more common, data structures need to be located closer to population centers. So I would argue that before they take over our cities, data centers need to be reconsidered in a more human scale, as something that adds to the human experience rather than detracts from it. Second, I wanted to address the massive environmental impacts of data storage and management. Currently, we store data on hard disk drives that need electricity to be read and encoded, need lots of energy to be kept cool, and need to be replaced every 10 or 20 years. With this project, the idea was to explore some of the newest innovations in data storage technology and to envision a sort of roadmap towards a completely carbon neutral data center. Next slide, please. So I chose Edinburgh as the site of the pilot project because of the city's grand plans to become the next data capital of Europe, with the Scottish Government investing in data science education and technology startups. And Cammon Island, right off the coast of the city centre, seemed like the perfect choice because it could be easily connected to international deep-sea broadband and act as a sort of connecting point between Edinburgh and the rest of the world. The water surrounding it could also be used for underwater server farms and a tidal power plant. The City of Edinburgh is also making plans for introducing a district heating scheme, and my proposed tidal power plant would be connected to the grid, and the excess heat generated by the server farm could be used to heat thousands of homes in Edinburgh. The island is also a popular tourist destination and home to quite a few World War II bunkers, which were a large influence on the design. Next slide. So the island will be home to 4 buildings, which will make up the first data grounds. Each structure has a different purpose, with some providing an educational experience and a symbolic link to data, some generating data-driven research, and others dedicated to the storage and management of data. Every building will be designed to blend into the landscape, inviting visitors to investigate the island and sort of discover the buildings with interactive elements. Visitors are able to climb on roofs, look in through courtyards and windows, or see servers beneath them when they swim. One of the key problems with the design was sort of balancing a need for high security versus providing a sense of openness and transparency. Next slide. So on this map of Cammon Island, you can see the new tidal power plant, which is hidden underneath the walkway on the bottom of the page there, which is the main route onto the island. The outdoor pools are on the western, sunnier side of the island on the route down towards the beach. The research center is sort of in between these other 2 buildings, and the archive is on the eastern side of the island with its entrance located at its highest peak. The data rigs can float around freely, but they need to dock at the island's pier every so often for maintenance and tours. So the idea was to have all these installations hidden away in the landscape, with visitors sort of stumbling across these buried buildings and slowly uncovering the hidden machinery of the island. Next slide. So the first building I'll talk about is the outdoor baths, which are heated by the island's main server farm. The server hall is cut into the side of the island, and the excess heat produced by these servers are used to heat the pool surrounding it, meaning that visitors can enjoy outdoor bathing all year round, while also experiencing a very physical connection to their cloud. The rest of this excess heated water travels to Edinburgh, where it connects to the district heating scheme. The cooled water then returns to the island, where once again it helps regulate the temperature of the servers. The system is already in use in quite a few Nordic cities. Next slide, please. So in this plan, you can see the view shown in the previous slide at the very top there, which marks the entrance to the outdoor pools. The form of the building, as well as its sunken entrance there, are inspired by the main bunker on Cammon Island. You can see the large multi-level server hall at the very back of the building, separated from the communal areas by a thin veil of water over a glass wall. There are some more server rooms hidden underneath each of the pools, which swimmers can see through their glass floors. Next slide, please. So the second building is a research center for big data. Big data refers to the massive amounts of data and metadata created by people using computers and devices every day. The island's research center is based on Glasgow's Urban Big Data Center, which uses data generated as a byproduct of sensors, apps, and websites to produce highly accurate social research. The center will also have office space for data analysts, cybersecurity experts, and hosting tech startup companies. The building is made up of a series of courtyards topped with sculptural roof lights, and these serve a dual purpose of both letting light into the deep plan and also providing visitors with an opportunity to sort of climb on top of them and look into the inner workings of this research center. Next slide, please. So the third element of the cooperative are the floating data rigs, which are used to maintain an underwater server farm. This basically means submerging servers inside waterproof tanks deep into the Firth of Forth, which is the bay surrounding the island where they are passively cooled by the cold water. These tanks are moved and maintained by floating platforms with 4 towers, each with a mechanical winch at the top. And each of these towers is a repurposed oil derrick, and the structure floats on top of a repurposed oil FPS platform. The structure will be clad in corten steel, skin to protect staff and visitors, and algae and other creatures will be encouraged to attach themselves to the partially submerged platform. Next slide.
You've had 10 minutes after one.
Oh, okay.
Go for it.
Yeah, I'll go fast. Yeah, so this is the final building, which is meant to future-proof the island and act as the final form of data storage. So it's based on 5D optical data storage, which is basically when lasers engrave grooves onto glass blocks, and each of these grooves represents a piece of information. And they've already done this today. They've done the whole Bible, and they've done the Superman movie on a piece of quartz glass. And the idea is that eventually this whole archive will be filled with information, and one of these glass blocks could have like a whole human lifetime inside of it. And then there's these little robots going around the building reading and engraving data. Next slide, please. So basically just a plan of the archive, which shows a classroom in the middle, which is quite important because that allows schools to come into the island and have sort of children experience data for themselves and increasing data literacy. And then the final pavilion in the middle of a big courtyard is the shareholders meeting pavilion, which is meant to happen every month, where sort of members can elect committee members and they can discuss the going-ons of the cooperative. Next slide, please. And since this project is set in Edinburgh and the surrounding natural landscapes, I thought it was important to try to reach a balance between creating visual markers for the city, becoming a new data capital, and respecting the existing fabric of the city. So basically having these little installations on tops of church spires, which could be small cell radio towers, and also then having these sort of oyster grow bags attached to the sides of the submerged server tanks, bringing oyster growing back into the Firth of Forth. And then you would also have a visual connection to the floating data rigs at night. Next slide, please. And then for the materiality, I wanted it to sort of respond to the fact that data technologies have a tendency to become obsolete within tens of years because it's such a rapidly moving technology. So the materiality of the buildings is transient in the sense that they will be visibly decaying over time, showing signs of age and being overgrown by plants. So I've got some broadmark concrete, which would be partially recycled from some of the old power plants in the Firth of Forth, which have recently been demolished, and then also using corten steel and allowing that to weather naturally. Next slide, please. So finally, what happens after the pilot project in Edinburgh? The plan would be for the Cloud Cooperative to go global and for data grounds to be established in cities all around the world. In an ideal world, energy-intensive broadband and hard disk storage would be replaced by satellites and carbon-neutral storage technologies. Corporate data centers would become community-owned, and private data would be transferred into the hands of individuals. The Cloud Cooperative imagines a new internet connected to the city by peer-to-peer networks, city-to-city data grounds, and worldwide satellites. An internet that is sustainable, transparent, and democratic. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well done, Tiia.
Thank you.
Great. I'll let the judges jump on and ask you some questions.
I was wondering the buildings themselves and how they relate to the island. It's maybe a drawing that I've not seen, and I have to congratulate again on the drawings themselves and the graphics, but I'm not clear exactly how the buildings sit on the island. Obviously, it looks like some sit on top, some are sort of recessed in. But what were your thoughts regarding that? Is it, are these real interventions that we're supposed to experience as things that are observed from afar, or is it up close?
Yeah, so the idea for that was the fact that Kremen Island is already a popular tourist destination, so people are already sort of clambering around mountainsides and sort of, and one of the key things was like these bunkers are often like very cut into the island and they're covered in grass, so you could be standing on top of a bunker and not realize you're standing on top of like a big monolithic building. So that was sort of I didn't want to take over such a beautiful natural landscape and then put something monolithic on it.
Off the landscape as opposed to something that sits on it. Yeah.
But then I also wanted to sort of have a visual cue, and that was where the sort of floating rigs came in.
Yeah, because they're obviously a strong sort of marker themselves, and it's maybe the other buildings a bit more discreet. It's got a bit of James Bond feeling about it.
Yeah. Oh, and the thing with the rigs was that I was hoping like people might object to having such huge things in the water, but there's already like defunct oil rigs floating in the Firth of Forth, and there's a whole graveyard of oil rigs like off the coast of Inverness and stuff like that. So it's like beautifying them a bit and bringing them with a new purpose.
It is, yeah, it's an active waterway with aircraft carriers going down, getting built, and yeah, so it is a it's something that's not alien to that environment.
Yeah.
Right. Any other judges? Obviously, you've been very detailed in your description.
I've got a statement rather than a question, which is probably favourable. Just when you were sort of saying about the oil rigs, I think, and I think beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You hear so much criticism on wind farms, and I think they're beautiful. And I actually think oil rigs have their own beauty. And I think what I really liked about this is the concept. I think it's something that's talked about, but people don't really understand it. And what I really love is by making this data center visual and an attraction, it's maybe bringing home a real message that everyone forgets. We all do things in our day-to-day life, and we will whinge about it. I don't even understand it. You know, I am a man with pen and paper, if I still could, and send letters. So I think it's a really, really strong concept and is bringing something to the forth, and actually very nice and original. So I can only have praise, and because I'm not techie, can't really ask any more questions.
I wasn't techie either before this.
I see Charlie's got a question.
Again, not really a question, just to say, I mean, I've seen the Facebook data center in the middle of Texas, and it's terrifying. So, vast, with a huge amount of active cooling and energy consumption associated with it. So I think you're spot on with the brief and in the ambition to kind of tame and humanize these things.
Thank you.
Lovely. Well, unless anybody... Oh, Mark's got a question. Mark, I'm going to make you the last question of the whole event. No pressure.
I was struggling to think of a question, if I'm being honest, because I thought it was a great presentation. I would sort of echo what some of the comments have been made from others, in the sense that I think a lot of people don't understand, particularly data centers. I also think that it's fantastic that you've tried to take something that people may not understand, how people can relate to it a bit more. I guess my question really is, do you foresee, and I'm going to steal perhaps Harrison's title of his presentation, to find the right balance, in the sense that these are going to be quite land-intensive structures in order to serve their purpose, that actually locating them onto more remote areas is going to have a more of a detrimental impact in terms of its surroundings. And I guess how you make that work, and in context of, you mentioned in your presentation about, these are moving closer and closer into city centres, I assume from a cost perspective, insofar as, these cables cost a fortune. You think about fibre. And so I guess, do you see sort of a barrier to this in terms of how far can you push this in terms of locations? I guess my question really to you, if that is a question.
Yeah, no, I understand. So basically, the thing with edge centers moving closer and closer to cities is that they're not necessarily connected by broadband anymore. They're connected by these small cell towers, which are hidden on rooftops and attached to the tops of lampposts. We might not even notice them at this point, but they're sort of coming, like they're all around us already. So the edge centers would be sort of like huge boxes on the sort of edges of towns, and then they would be connected to these small cell towers. So that, and another thing is that this technology for storage of data is also becoming exponentially smaller. So even these glass cubes would eventually they would be able to hold more and more information inside them. So it would be possible to have sort of city interventions instead, and that was sort of the direction I was going to go in the first place. So having just like a gap site and trying to create something in there that would only have these quartz glass blocks in them. But I figured that's maybe looking too far into the future with this technology. So I wanted to sort of have an in-between phase where that could be phased out and eventually only have these smaller interventions in the end.
Yeah, thank you.